Sarah Martinez never thought much about her morning coffee runs. As a communications specialist at the naval base, she had developed a routine that kept her grounded in the chaos of military life. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she would stop by the small coffee shop downtown and pick up orders for her department. It was a simple task that gave her a few minutes of peace before diving into the endless stream of encrypted messages and radio communications that filled her days. The morning started like any other. Sarah pulled into the parking lot of Harbor Beans, the local coffee shop that had become a second home to many of the base personnel. The owner, Mrs. Chen, knew everyone's order by heart and had the drinks ready before customers even reached the counter. Sarah appreciated the efficiency and the warm smile that came with every transaction. "The usual for the communications team?" Mrs. Chen asked, already reaching for the large carrier tray. "Yes, ma'am. 5 coffees, 2 with extra sugar for the night shift guys who are still hanging around," Sarah replied, checking her phone for any urgent messages from the base. As she waited, Sarah noticed the coffee shop was busier than usual. A group of high-ranking officers sat in the corner booth, their conversation hushed but intense. She recognized a few faces but kept her distance, understanding the unspoken rule about respecting privacy in public spaces. Military personnel learned early that some conversations were not meant for casual observation. The bell above the door chimed as another customer entered. Sarah glanced up from her phone and felt her breath catch slightly. Admiral James Harrison walked through the door, his presence immediately commanding the attention of everyone in the small space. Sarah had seen him before, during base briefings, but never up close. He was younger than she had expected, probably in his early 50s, with steel gray hair and the kind of bearing that spoke of decades of leadership under pressure. Admiral Harrison moved through the coffee shop with purpose, nodding politely to the other officers but clearly focused on his own mission. He approached the counter where Sarah stood waiting for her order, positioning himself just close enough that she caught a hint of his cologne mixed with the crisp scent of his dress uniform. "Admiral Harrison." Mrs. Chen greeted him with obvious respect. "The usual, sir? Actually, make it 2 today, Mrs. Chen. Black coffee for me, and—" He paused, glancing at the menu board. "Surprise me with something that might help me stay awake for the next 18 hours. Sarah found herself studying his profile as he spoke. There was something about the way he carried himself that suggested he bore the weight of significant responsibility. His hands, she noticed, were steady as he reached for his wallet, but there was a tension in his shoulders that spoke of recent stress. Mrs. Chen busied herself with preparing the Admiral's order, while Sarah's own drinks sat ready on the counter. She should have grabbed them and left, but something kept her rooted in place. Perhaps it was curiosity, or maybe just the unusual circumstance of being so close to someone whose decisions affected thousands of people. The Admiral turned slightly, and their eyes met for a brief moment. Sarah expected a polite nod, the kind of acknowledgement that typically passed between military personnel of different ranks in civilian settings. Instead, Admiral Harrison's gaze lingered on her face with an intensity that made her suddenly self-conscious. "Communications?" he asked quietly, noticing the small department pin on her jacket. "Yes, sir. Sarah Martinez, Communications Specialist, 3rd class," she replied automatically, falling into the formal tone that came naturally when addressing superior officers. Admiral Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "Good department. Critical work." His voice carried the weight of someone who understood exactly how important clear communication could be in military operations. "Thank you, sir. We do our best to keep the lines open," Sarah responded, unsure why this casual exchange felt more significant than it should. Mrs. Chen placed the Admiral's 2 cups on the counter, breaking the moment. "Here you go, Admiral. Extra strong, just like you ordered." As Admiral Harrison reached for his drinks, his phone buzzed against the counter. The display lit up with what appeared to be an urgent message. Sarah couldn't help but notice how his expression shifted immediately from casual to focused concentration. Whatever he was reading required his full attention. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen," he said, placing money on the counter while still reading his phone. "Keep the change." Sarah gathered her own coffee carrier, preparing to leave, when Admiral Harrison's phone rang. The ringtone was different from a normal cell phone call. It had the distinctive sound of a secure military communication line. The Admiral answered immediately. "Harrison here," he said, his voice dropping to the authoritative tone Sarah had heard during base briefings. She should have left then. Protocol suggested that listening to any part of a superior officer's phone conversation, even in public, was inappropriate. But something in the Admiral's voice made her pause. There was an urgency there that suggested this was not a routine call. "How long ago?" Admiral Harrison asked, his free hand gripping the edge of the counter. "And we have confirmation on the source?" Sarah found herself frozen by the coffee counter, carrier tray in hand, as she watched the Admiral's demeanor transform completely. Whatever information he was receiving was clearly significant. "I need all available communication specialists on this immediately," Admiral Harrison continued. "Full spectrum analysis. And I want reports every 30 minutes. The words, communication specialists, caught Sarah's attention. This was her field, her area of expertise. She understood the protocols and procedures that Admiral Harrison was likely implementing based on whatever crisis was unfolding. Admiral Harrison ended the call and stood motionless for several seconds, processing whatever he had learned. Sarah noticed that his hands, which had been perfectly steady moments before, now showed a slight tremor as he picked up his coffee cups. "Excuse me," Admiral Harrison said, turning to Sarah. "Martinez, was it?" "Yes, sir," she replied, surprised that he remembered her name from their brief introduction. "What's your security clearance level?" he asked, his tone now completely professional. "Level 3, sir. Standard for communications operations," Sarah answered. Wondering where this conversation was heading, Admiral Harrison studied her face for a moment, as if weighing some important decision. "How quickly can you get to the base?" "About 15 minutes, sir, depending on traffic," Sarah replied automatically. "Make it 10, Admiral Harrison said. "Yes, sir. Bring those coffees with you. Something tells me we're all going to need the caffeine." As Sarah headed for her car, her mind raced with questions. What kind of situation would require Admiral Harrison to personally recruit additional communications personnel from a coffee shop? Why had he seemed to recognize something in her that made her suitable for whatever was developing? She drove toward the base faster than usual, the coffee carrier secured in her passenger seat, Admiral Harrison's words echoing in her mind. The morning had started as a simple coffee run, but something told her that whatever happened next would be far from routine. Sarah arrived at the base to find it buzzing with unusual activity. Security personnel were conducting more thorough checks than normal, and she noticed additional vehicles in the command parking area. Whatever had prompted Admiral Harrison's urgent phone call was clearly affecting the entire installation. She made her way to the communications center, distributing coffee to her colleagues who were already deep into what appeared to be an intensive operation. The main monitoring room was filled with more personnel than she had ever seen during a regular shift, and every workstation was occupied. "Martinez," called Lieutenant Commander Roberts, her immediate supervisor. "Where have you been? We've been trying to reach you." "Coffee run, sir." "Admiral Harrison instructed me to come in immediately," Sarah replied, setting down her own cup and moving toward her assigned workstation. "Admiral Harrison?" Roberts looked surprised. "How did you encounter the Admiral?" Before Sarah could explain, Admiral Harrison himself entered the communications center. The room immediately shifted to attention, but he waved everyone back to their work with a quick gesture. "Status report," Admiral Harrison commanded, moving to the central monitoring station. "Sir, we've been tracking unusual communication patterns from several foreign vessels in international waters approximately 200 miles northeast of our position," Roberts began. "The signals are encrypted, but our analysts believe they may be coordinating some kind of operation." Admiral Harrison nodded grimly. "What kind of operation?" "Unknown at this time, sir, but the frequency patterns suggest submarine communications. Multiple vessels, possibly coordinating movements." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Submarine activity near their coastal waters was always a serious concern, but coordinated submarine movements suggested something much more significant than routine patrols. "Martinez," Admiral Harrison called out, causing Sarah to look up from her workstation in surprise. I need you to take point on frequency analysis for the next phase of this operation. Sir? Sarah was confused. She was qualified for frequency analysis, but there were more senior specialists available. Your personnel file indicates specialized training in underwater acoustic communication systems, Admiral Harrison continued. Is that correct? Yes, sir. I completed advanced training last year, but I haven't had much practical application, Sarah admitted. Today you will, Admiral Harrison said. I need you to focus specifically on low-frequency transmissions. Look for anything that doesn't match standard submarine communication protocols. Sarah moved to the specialized acoustic monitoring station, her hands working automatically to adjust the equipment settings, while her mind processed the implications of what they were tracking. Coordinated submarine activity near their waters could mean anything from training exercises to something far more serious. As she fine-tuned the acoustic sensors, Sarah began picking up the signals that had prompted this emergency response. The transmissions were indeed coming from multiple underwater sources, but something about the patterns struck her as unusual. Admiral, Sarah called out after several minutes of analysis, I'm detecting anomalies in the communication structure. Admiral Harrison moved to her station immediately. What kind of anomalies? The signal timing doesn't match any known submarine communication protocols, Sarah explained, pointing to the patterns displayed on her screen. The intervals are too precise, almost like they're following a predetermined sequence rather than responding to operational needs. Could they be using a new encryption method? Admiral Harrison asked. Possibly, but, sir. Sarah hesitated, uncertain whether her observation was significant enough to voice. Speak freely, Martinez. The patterns remind me more of sonar mapping than communication, sir. Like they're conducting detailed underwater surveys of our coastal areas. Admiral Harrison's expression darkened. Show me exactly what you're seeing. Sarah began explaining the technical details of the signals she was monitoring, pointing out the specific characteristics that suggested mapping activity rather than routine communications. As she spoke, she noticed Admiral Harrison's attention was completely focused on her analysis. How confident are you in this assessment? He asked. Based on the signal characteristics, I'd estimate about 70% confidence, sir. But if I could correlate this data with historical mapping patterns, I could give you a more definitive answer. Do it, Admiral Harrison ordered. Lieutenant Commander Roberts, I need historical sonar data from the last 6 months for the same geographical area. As Roberts worked to retrieve the requested data, Sarah continued monitoring the incoming signals. The submarine activity was definitely increasing, with more vessels joining what appeared to be a coordinated operation. Admiral, Roberts called out. We're also picking up increased surface vessel activity in the same area. Looks like at least 3 ships moving in formation. What kind of ships? Admiral Harrison asked. Analysis suggests research vessels, sir, but they're maintaining radio silence, which is unusual for scientific operations. Sarah's workstation chimed as the historical data Roberts had requested became available. She immediately began comparing the current signal patterns with past recordings from the same area. Sir, Sarah said, her voice tight with concern. The patterns are identical to sonar mapping conducted in this area 3 months ago. But according to our records, there were no authorized mapping operations during that time period. Are you saying these same vessels have been conducting unauthorized surveys of our coastal waters for months? Admiral Harrison asked. It appears that way, sir. And based on the current signal intensity and distribution, they're creating much more detailed maps now than they were 3 months ago. Admiral Harrison stood silent for several moments, processing this information. Sarah could see him weighing options and considering implications that were far beyond her security clearance level. Martinez, he said finally, I need you to do something that's going to require you to think outside normal protocols. Sir, I want you to attempt to decode their actual mapping data. Not just identify that they're mapping, but understand what specifically they're surveying. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. What Admiral Harrison was asking would require her to essentially hack into foreign military communications in real time. It was technically possible with her training, but it was also far beyond anything she had ever attempted. Sir, that level of signal interception might be detected by their systems, Sarah warned. I understand the risks, Admiral Harrison replied, But I need to know what they're looking for under our waters. Sarah began adjusting her equipment for active signal interception rather than passive monitoring. This was dangerous territory. If the foreign submarines detected her attempts to decode their communications, it could escalate the situation significantly. As she worked, Sarah became aware that the entire communications center had gone quiet. Everyone was watching her attempt something that could provide crucial intelligence about foreign activities in their territorial waters. The signal decryption software began processing the intercepted data, and slowly, patterns began to emerge on Sarah's screen. What she saw made her blood run cold. "Admiral," she said quietly, "they're not just mapping our coastal areas. What are they mapping? Our underwater infrastructure, sir. Power cables, communication lines, everything that connects our base to the mainland." Admiral Harrison's hands gripped the edge of her workstation, his knuckles white with tension. Sarah could see that this information confirmed his worst fears about whatever operation was unfolding in their waters. "How detailed are their maps?" he asked. "Detailed enough to target specific vulnerabilities," Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The implications of what she had discovered hung heavy in the air. Foreign submarines had been systematically mapping the underwater infrastructure that supported their naval base, gathering intelligence that could be used to cripple their communications and power systems. "Martinez," Admiral Harrison said, his voice carrying a weight that made Sarah understand she was now part of something much larger than a routine monitoring operation. "I need you to keep monitoring their signals, but from this point forward, everything you hear and see is classified at the highest levels." "Understood, sir." "And Martinez? Your call sign for this operation is Fox 9. From now on, that's how you'll be identified in all communications related to this situation." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of her new responsibility. The simple coffee run that had started her morning had evolved into something that could affect national security. As she returned her attention to the monitoring equipment, she realized that Admiral Harrison had chosen her for this task, for reasons that went far beyond her technical qualifications. Over the next several hours, Sarah maintained constant vigilance at her monitoring station, while the situation in the waters near their base continued to escalate. The foreign submarines had been joined by additional vessels, and their mapping operations had become more aggressive and systematic. "Fox 9, Admiral Harrison's voice came through her headset, using her new call sign for the first time. The formality of the designation reminded Sarah that she was now operating at a security level she had never experienced before. "Yes, sir," she responded, adjusting her headset as she continued tracking the underwater signals. "I need you to focus on a specific area coordinates that I'm transmitting to your station now. We have intelligence suggesting that's their primary target zone." Sarah watched as new coordinates appeared on her screen, defining an area that included the main underwater power cables supplying the base. If those cables were damaged, the base could lose primary power for weeks while repairs were conducted. As she focused her monitoring equipment on the specified coordinates, Sarah detected something that made her stomach drop. "Admiral, I'm reading multiple submarine signatures converging on the target area. At least 4 vessels, possibly more. How close are they to our infrastructure?" Admiral Harrison asked, his voice tight with concern. "Approximately 500 meters from the main power cable junction, sir. At their current rate of approach, they'll be directly over our critical infrastructure within the next 30 minutes. Sarah could hear Admiral Harrison consulting with other senior officers in the background. The tension in the communications center had reached a breaking point, with every person understanding that they were monitoring a potential attack on their base's vital systems. "Fox 9, Admiral Harrison's voice returned to her headset. "I need you to attempt something that's never been tried before. Can you use our acoustic systems to interfere with their sonar mapping?" Sarah considered the technical challenges involved. "Sir, theoretically it's possible, but it would require precise timing and coordination, and they would definitely detect our interference. At this point, we may not have a choice," Admiral Harrison replied. "If they complete their mapping and begin targeting our infrastructure, we'll be facing a much more serious situation." "Understood, sir. I'll need about 10 minutes to recalibrate the acoustic systems for active interference." As Sarah began modifying her equipment settings, She became aware that Admiral Harrison had moved to stand directly behind her workstation. She could feel his presence, the weight of command that surrounded him, as he watched her attempt something that could either disrupt the foreign operation or escalate the situation into something far more dangerous. "Fox 9, Admiral Harrison said quietly, so that only she could hear. "I want you to know that what you're doing right now could prevent a significant threat to this base and everyone on it." Sarah's hands paused on her equipment controls. "Sir, the intelligence we've gathered suggests this isn't just surveillance. Based on the precision of their mapping and the resources they've committed, we believe they're preparing for some kind of sabotage operation." The weight of this revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She wasn't just monitoring routine foreign naval activity. She was tracking the preparation for what could be an act of war against their installation. "How long have you suspected this, sir?" she asked. "The initial intelligence came in this morning, just before I met you at the coffee shop," Admiral Harrison explained. "When I saw your training background and security clearance, I knew you were exactly what we needed for this operation." Evermine. Sarah realized that their encounter at Harbor Beans had not been coincidental from Admiral Harrison's perspective. He had recognized her as a resource that could be crucial for dealing with the developing crisis. "I'm ready to begin the interference operation, sir," Sarah announced, her hand steady on the controls despite the magnitude of what she was about to attempt. "Proceed, Fox 9. Sarah activated the acoustic interference system, sending precisely calibrated sound waves toward the foreign submarines. The goal was to disrupt their sonar mapping without creating patterns that would be interpreted as an aggressive act. Within minutes, the effects of her interference became apparent on the monitoring screens. The foreign submarines' mapping operations became erratic, their sonar signals confused by the acoustic disruption Sarah was generating. "It's working, sir," Sarah reported. "Their mapping accuracy has dropped significantly." But even as she spoke, Sarah detected new activity on her monitors. "Admiral, they're responding to our interference. I'm reading course changes from all 4 submarines." "Are they withdrawing?" Admiral Harrison asked. "Negative, sir. They're adjusting their positions, possibly to compensate for our interference or to investigate its source." The submarine movements created a new pattern on Sarah's monitoring screen, one that brought them closer to the base rather than farther away. Her interference had succeeded in disrupting their mapping operation, but it had also revealed the location of their acoustic monitoring systems. "Fox 9, Admiral Harrison said, his voice carrying a weight that made Sarah understand the gravity of their situation. "They know we're tracking them now." "Yes, sir. And based on their movement patterns, they're trying to locate our monitoring station." Admiral Harrison was silent for several moments, and Sarah could sense that he was making decisions that would affect not just their immediate situation, but potentially the relationship between nations. "Fox 9, he said finally. "I need you to prepare for emergency shutdown of all our monitoring equipment." "Sir, if they locate our monitoring station, they'll know exactly how much intelligence we've gathered about their operation. That information could be more valuable to them than completing their mapping mission." Sarah understood immediately. If the foreign submarines could determine the extent of American knowledge about their activities, it would compromise not just this operation, but potentially future intelligence gathering capabilities. "How much time do we have?" she asked. "Based on their current approach vector, approximately 15 minutes before they reach a position where they could accurately target our acoustic monitoring systems." Sarah's training had prepared her for equipment failures and routine technical challenges, but nothing had prepared her for the possibility that foreign submarines might attempt to destroy the systems she was operating. "Admiral," she said, studying her monitoring displays, "I'm detecting something else. The submarines aren't just approaching our monitoring station. They're taking positions around our entire underwater infrastructure perimeter." Admiral Harrison moved closer to her workstation, studying the tactical display that showed the submarine positions relative to the base's critical underwater systems. "They're preparing for coordinated action," he said grimly. "This has moved beyond reconnaissance." "What are your orders, sir?" Sarah asked. Admiral Harrison stood silent for a long moment, his hands rigid as he gripped the edge of her workstation. Sarah could see that he was processing information and making calculations that went far beyond her security clearance level. "Fox 9, he said finally, his voice carrying an authority that made Sarah understand she was about to receive orders that would define not just her career, but possibly her entire future. "Yes, sir? I need you to document everything you've observed and learned during this operation. Every signal pattern, every tactical movement, every technical detail. If something happens to our monitoring systems, that information may be the only intelligence we have about their capabilities and intentions." "Understood, sir." "And Martinez?" Admiral Harrison used her real name for the first time since assigning her the Fox 9 call sign. "Sir, when this is over, your life in the Navy is going to be very different. What you've accomplished today has brought you to the attention of people who operate at levels of national security that most military personnel never experience." Sarah felt a mix of pride and apprehension at Admiral Harrison's words. The simple coffee run that had started her day had evolved into something that would reshape her entire military career. As she continued monitoring the foreign submarines while documenting the intelligence she had gathered, Sarah realized that Admiral Harrison had used her call sign Fox 9 because he had recognized something in her that even she hadn't fully understood about her own capabilities. The hands that had been steady when she first met Admiral Harrison at the coffee shop were now rock solid as she operated equipment that could determine the outcome of a potential international incident. She had become exactly the person Admiral Harrison had needed her to be, and there would be no returning to the routine world of simple coffee runs and standard communications duties. The foreign submarines continued their coordinated movements in the waters below. But Sarah now understood that she had become a crucial element in protecting not just her base, but potentially the security infrastructure of the entire region. Admiral Harrison's rigid hands on her workstation represented not just the weight of command, but his confidence that Fox 9 would see this operation through to whatever conclusion awaited them.